Representation Comics. I present to you Lee Gaddis of Gaddis Gaming, Mike L., one of the reasons we're here today, and the creator of Black Lightning, ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Tony Isabella.
Hi guys. Okay, so we're here to talk about black superheroes and representation. So I'd like to go right back to the time the Black Lightning was created in the 1970s and kind of talk about, for the people that don't know, what it was like back then. First with you, Tony, as a writer and a reader, and Lee, with you as a reader. Yeah. What was it like in the 1970s for black superheroes?
Well, let me go back a little bit further to the mid-60s. Do you know who the first black hero to star in his own comic book was?
Anyone? Carlos? No?
Anyone? Bueller? Anyone?
It was a Western character called Lobo.
Yep.
It lasted 2 issues, not because it wasn't a great comic, because it was, but because in those days, before there were comic shops, there were distributors, regional distributors in entire parts of the country that would not put that book out on sale. And some of them, it was published by Dell Comics, some of these distributors wouldn't put out any Dell comics during the few months they were publishing Lobo. So the comic had to be canceled. That was still the case in the 70s, although the regional distributors were a little bit more open-minded, but there were still areas of the country where you would not see a Black Panther comic, you would not see Luke Cage. It wasn't until the coming of the comic shops that you really got away from that, because the comic shops would sell anything they thought they could sell. So when these companies in the late 60s and 70s did comics with black characters, it was by no means a sure thing. They were taking a risk. And so whether all those efforts were well done or not, it was still a major step forward when the publishers decided they were going to do this.
So Lee, growing up in, was it the 60s? 70s? Okay, 70s. Growing up in the 70s.
Yeah.
So what was it like? You grew up in the Metro Detroit area, right?
Yeah.
What was it like for you?
So growing up in Detroit, if you live in a major metropolitan city, you're lucky that you have comic shops, right, that you were going to. And I grew up at a time when comic shops had just started to open as exclusive businesses. You know, they catered to a lot of the, D&D, Dragon magazine. So it was magazines and comics. You had a lot of the horror magazines also. The closest place for me to consume product was actually a comic book rack inside of a 7-Eleven.
Sure.
So at the end of my house, there was a 7-Eleven, or end of my block, there was a 7-Eleven. I could go down there and I could grab whatever they had. And so I was lucky enough to be able to, when I started actually collecting and not just grabbing what was available at the comic shop, I was able to go in and actually get the comic books that I wanted. And at the time, there was very little representation, although we had snuck in through the back door through the X-Men, which was the Malcolm X, Martin Luther King conversation that was happening through Magneto and Professor Xavier. So I was a big X-Men fan because I knew what they were saying behind the scenes with using mutants as a metaphor for black people, because to Tony's point, if you came out and directly put black representation or minority representation in a book, then you wouldn't get it carried. You'd have a lot of pushback. But like Star Trek did in the 60s, you were able to talk about complex social political issues if you disguised it as something alien and or foreign, or as a monster or a creature, right? So the Federation versus the Klingons were actually America versus the Russians, but we disguised it as that. We were able to have that conversation by disguising in that metaphor. And growing up at that time, I realized that there wasn't a lot of representation when I went to the comic store of people that looked like me that I could aspire to. We had the Falcon, we had Black Panther, but nobody had their own book. To being able to see Black Lightning be a premier character headlining his own book, it was just revolutionary. And coming out of DC also made it very revolutionary, because before that, I had shied away from DC because there was no minority representation in DC Comics. And so this to me was like an opening of the door, and you could see the light starting to shine through.
And so, Tony, what do you think was happening in the early 70s that made it the right time for a black lead character to come out of DC Comics?
Well, we were, a whole bunch of new writers and artists were coming into the field in the 70s. We were young, we were idealistic, we were generally progressive. We wanted our comics to reflect the world around us more. So you had writers and artists who wanted to tell these stories. You had what they called the black exploitation films that were big money makers. I don't like that term myself because I went to see a lot of those movies with the young black artists who had come into Marvel at that point, and I never saw anybody feeling exploited. They just loved seeing themselves on the screen. So the black exploitation films gave us, you know, a reason to tell the suits that we could make money doing these books, but the real drive for these books were the creators themselves, and not just the younger guys. Stan Lee, who was, you know, older than all of us. Stan was into the, you know, wanted this. Jack Kirby wanted this. Roy Thomas, who was just a few years older than us, wanted this. So it was the combination of we kind of had a business rationale to do it, but we also had all these young creators who wanted our superhero universe to be more reflective of the real world.
So was there a reason for the lightning? What made you pick that superpower?
Well, yeah, I created everything about Black Lightning except the Black Lightning part first. So I knew Jefferson Pierce. I knew everything about the character. I know stuff about him that has never appeared in a comic book. Mm-hmm. And then, like a couple of hours before the pitch meeting, I realized I hadn't given him any superhero identity or superpowers. And I'm wandering, you know, through the DC offices, kind of desperate, and I saw this Wonder Woman cover in which Wonder Woman is it was a sketch of a cover that was going to be drawn of Wonder Woman lassoing a black lightning bolt, and she's saying something like, "Hera, help me stop this black lightning bolt from destroying the city." And I'm going, you know, it's the 70s. I'm thinking black lightning, that's catchy. So in about an hour before my pitch meeting, I created all the superpowered aspects of Black Lightning.
Nice. So Lee, as a reader, now going through the 70s to the 80s to the 90s, how do you see things evolving over that time with representation?
Yeah, so as we become more mature in our taste over time, you know, number one, you had people like Tony kicking down the door, right, and allowing that conversation to be had, and then they could no longer make the financial argument that, well, you know, to his point, that these distributors won't carry it and it won't make money. So green overcame, you know, black at that point. You were able to have a new generation of writers come in, people who had relationships with people of color, you know, who were able to articulate that experience and wrote from their own personal experience, which gave authenticity to those stories, right? It's not that you needed a black person to write that character, but you needed somebody who understood what it was they were writing, right? Tony didn't write a black character. He wrote a character that just happened to be black, which makes his stories stand the test of time. And I think what happened with Luke Cage later on is that they were white writers writing a black character. And that didn't work because nobody in my neighborhood said Sweet Christmas. You know, that just wasn't going down. You know, a tiara, you know what I'm saying? I mean, these are, you know, so when you talk about cultural appropriation and how that is then exploited, when you have people with integrity writing and creating those characters, it doesn't matter who the source person is, as long as you're writing with that type of integrity. And I saw that happen in Black Lightning first, and then I saw it evolve as more people came in contact with other people outside of their own little cultural bubble. And so those experiences could be talked about and shared in a way that hadn't happened before. And in each iteration, it just, you know, opened up more and more and more. And I think the turning point was probably after The Watchmen.
Sure.
You know, after The Watch, all bets were off after that. You know, because you could take those Charlton characters, put them in a new wrapper, and then tell that story, but everybody knew what those characters were. And then once writers were taken off of the leash and given the freedom to express themselves, and then they can include all type of stories. you know, and I remember one of the iconic panels was in Green Lantern when the black guy
Right.
confronts him and says, look, you're saving the blue guys on this planet and the purple guys on this planet, but what you're doing for the black people right here on Earth. I mean, that was a seismic ripple in the comic book industry as a
Right.
consumer, because now that conversation can happen. Now people can start talking about that, and now you can start including those people in that conversation as I think as a storyteller. I mean, I can't speak for them because I don't write, but you know, for me as a consumer of that product, all bets were off. You know, we became more inclusive as a consuming audience, which brought more people of color into the consumer base, which then broadened the pool of talent and of people who could then spend money on something, because now I see myself. I can see myself represented, you know, and not as a caricature, but as a character. And I think what Tony did was allow that to happen on a higher level than I think the industry had been ready for before, and especially DC. There hadn't been a black character in any DC comic.
There have been a few supporting characters.
Yeah.
Any conversation of this sort, and even though the character is African and not American,
Right.
has to include Don McGregor's work on the Black Panther.
Right.
Yes.
If you've seen the Black Panther movie, Don's influence on that story is as great as the original creators of the character, Stan Lee and Jack Kirby. And Don was fearless, Don was feisty, Don constantly had to fight with idiots who'd say, how come there's no white people in Black Panther? And it's because it takes place in the secluded country of Wakanda that's all black.
Non-colonized, by the way, never been
yeah,
colonized, so there's
never-
no Western influence.
It was never defeated until some idiot let Doctor Doom do it. The Wakandans were so good at this that they had a contingency plan if the Skrulls invaded the Earth, and they beat the Skrulls easily. And most of Don McGregor's Black Panther work is now in print again.
Yeah.
And I really recommend it. It was way ahead of its time, and it still holds up today.
That goes back to writing with integrity.
Right.
He wrote characters, and because he wrote characters, it withstands the test of time. It's not stuck in the 70s. It's not stuck in the 60s. You can read that now today and get the same fresh experience as if you had read it during that time, because the integrity of the story is there, and I've read all of them.
So going through again, Black Lightning, the original series only lasted, was it less than 20 issues, right?
10, 11 issues,
Right.
something like that.
But he continued to be around because he was in The Outsiders, and then he had another series in the 90s.
Right.
And now we flash forward to 2017, and Black Lightning has his own TV show. What about the environment today, about the climate today, makes it, you think, the right time for that character to come back in such a way?
There's a couple of different factors here. DC Comics got new management. The old management that used to turn down movie and TV people who wanted to do Black Lightning, they're gone. The old management, which screwed over Tony Isabella, gone. New management comes in. They loved my work. They loved Black Lightning. They reach out to me, and that's what started the ball rolling on Black Lightning again. Even before we had signed, the agreement that settled all past differences, and which I can't talk about in detail, DC and I already knew we wanted to work together. And the very first thing they asked me to do was write a paper called Black Lightning's Core Values. And that was the start of the TV show. That original paper was the starting point for both my new series, Black Lightning Cold Dead Hands, which I actually started work on before they hired Salim and Mar Brock Akil to develop the TV series. So we're all working from those core values, and committed people in both venues, committed to telling these stories in a meaningful way of bringing superheroes into the real world. And that's why it's paid off. That's why Black Lightning was the most anticipated new series of 2018, why it's a hit now. The comic book is doing well. We're going to do more Black Lightning comic books. We're in the process of deciding what's next there. It's the combination of a great character being worked on by people committed to that character and that character's stories and the real world stories and the real world influences, all that combines to make, I hate to sound like I'm boasting, because Black Lightning to me is so much bigger than just me, and bigger than just a TV series. But it's committed people doing great work and determined to do great work. Everything they do on the TV series, everything we do in the comic book, the aim is always to do it better than it's been done before.
So Lee, are you caught up on the show Black Lightning?
Oh, completely.
Okay, great.
It's much watched TV, and believe I tried to watch other shows on CW,
Sure.
and it's just not for me. But the way that they write Black Lightning and the way that the level, the quality of the writing is there. It shows in every episode. They hire quality actors, to portray the roles, and so when you have people that are committed to excellence, it just shows through on the screen. And Black Lightning is not. It's a superhero show that's grounded in reality, whereas a lot of the other superhero shows are grounded in fantasy.
Right.
This is a fantasy world with fantasy stories that are going on, whereas Black Lightning, it's a show that deals with real world problems, and the solutions just happen to include superpowers. Right. So there's an attitudinal shift in Black Lightning that you don't have in the other CW shows.
The other CW shows are edgy, but they're fantasy edgy. Black Lightning broke that mold. It's edgy in a real world sense.
Well, and I noticed, because I watched the show with G.I. Jolie, the co-organizer of Action, and she says, I don't even care about the superhero stuff. I just want to see what happens to these characters, to his daughters and his wife and all the supporting characters, and that's what keeps us coming back every week, right?
The writing is solid. The writing is solid in Black Lightning as a TV show, just like Tony made it solid in the comic book, and his commitment to characters and writing and storytelling, it also carries over into that type of dedication carries over into the people that are working on the TV show as well.
Yeah, the TV show has, they've been very respectful to me. When Salim and Mara Bracakil were hired, we had a big conference call, lasted a couple of hours with them asking me questions. Salim flew me out to Burbank last year to meet with all the writers. I private messaged with several of the cast members, and I'm totally available whenever somebody has a question. And if indeed there's a second season, and there's gonna be, they want me to pitch episodes for the second season.
That's great.
So I could end up actually writing for the show.
That's
Wow.
great.
Yeah, it's just the show and the comic book and everything, with Black Lightning, it's just a blessing and just making for the best years of my life.
Yeah. And now it's up to us as consumers, as people who consume this product, to support high quality content like that. Nobody's asked you to go out and watch junk just because there's a black person on it. We're saying this is the caliber of writing and talent that we want to consume, right? We want top quality actors. We want top quality writing. We want our shows to be about things that matter to us. And we can show our support by buying the Black Lightning comic book, by using Black Lightning in our social media, and also broaden that pool so that it includes more people, right? So that more people will have the opportunity, because they can't say, well, nobody's going to buy it or nobody's going to watch it. Well, obviously, right now it's only like 3 or 4 episodes in, and it's the highest rated show on the CW. So obviously we are there, right? Women are 53% of the population in the United States, right across the river. And if you do write shows that exclude them, then you're excluding a whole fan base that is there to support you. If you're not writing characters, the supporting characters in Black Lightning, his 2 daughters, right? You want to see what is going on with them. You know there's an evolution coming with those characters. And I'm just excited to see what happens with them as I am excited to see what happens with Black Lightning, right? As a mature adult superhero dealing with these issues.
Well, my concept of diversity in comics has grown. When I first got into comics, I was thinking in terms just of characters of color. But now I look at the audience we have, people, women, men, gay, straight, Muslim, Christian, atheist, conservative, liberal, people of faith. And I feel that we need to include them all. Not in every story, because there wouldn't be room for a story, but I want our readership to see themselves reflected in our stories. Now, I can't directly speak to what kind of audience sees themselves in a character in the comic book who is a Asian appearing, gender fluid, shape-shifting illegal alien. But if there are any people from that demographic out there, I hope they enjoy seeing themselves in the comic.
Yeah. And again, the power that we have as a fan base is to let them know that this is what we want, and we want that at a level of excellence, right?
Yep.
Because Tony has set a standard for writing that is carrying through beyond just his comic book, because he set that standard, and then other people are building on that standard to create an excellent TV show, right? So how do we include women of color as writers, as creators, not just in front of the camera, but also behind the camera? How do we include other groups to make other voices heard, to give us new entertainment and perspectives that we don't normally get in traditional media? These are things that we can demand as consumers. The way I demanded it back in the 70s as a little kid when I went into the comic book store and bought that Black Lightning comic book, I was demanding with my dollars that they produce this. That's how we can influence this market, and we can, because we are the consumers of this product, and we can steer this ship in that way. By demanding that people like Tony stay on the job and that they continue to write stories by supporting their product, and by watching and viewing and sharing on social media what we enjoy. We dictate that to them, because we say, look, if you give us junk, we're not going to watch it. You can't just put anything out there and expect us to consume it, right? We can demand that, and we can steer that ship, and we can also let our voices be heard by supporting people who are doing quality work, no matter who they are.
I mean, and there's not a day that goes by that I don't look at comics created by people who were not represented in my industry when I started. G. Willow Wilson, an American Muslim woman writing Ms. Marvel. If you had told me about this in 1972, I wouldn't have thought it possible, but there it is, and it's a great comic.
Yep.
We have gay writers and artists now. We have a lot more women writers and artists. We have Gail Simone, we have G. Willow Wilson. We just have there's so much talent out there, and the doors are wide open, but the fans need to support it, especially since there's this pushback coming from the alt-right Nazis that have crawled out from under their rocks in the wake of us electing President Dumpster to the White House.
We're in Canada.
So there's,
I'm in Canada. I'm hoping they let me back into
We might not be able to get
America.
back across the border after this panel. Sorry, guys. Yeah.
So there's been resistance all along from editors, right? And sometimes even from readers who said, no, you can't do a black character because it's not going to sell. You can't do a woman. You can't do a Muslim. And now do you feel vindication that you've proven them all wrong?
God, yes. Yes, I feel, all the, I went through some very tough times. I was blackballed at DC under the old management. There was a lot of slander going around about me. I feel totally vindicated. I've outlived my enemies, so to speak. I dance and sing on their graves. Metaphorically speaking, some of them are still alive for now. But no, it's wonderful. I mean, to see the stuff that I fought for, that guys like Don McGregor fought for, Rich Buckler, so many other guys fought for this, and to see it out there now, to see this kind of seismic shift in our readership and in the kinds of comics we're producing. I read a shit ton of comics every week. I read manga, I read European graphic novels, I read alternative stuff, I read reprints of great old comics and even reprints of crappy old comics. It is a golden age of comics right now. There's so much out there, and in a lot of cases it doesn't even cost you money to read it because your local library will have it.
Right. Yeah, library collections, yeah. Yeah, and that's something you also can demand at your local library. If they have a young reader section or a graphic novel section, demand that they put one in, and that would help give people access to books that maybe don't have access to a local comic book store?
In my neck of the woods, there's a consortium called CleveNet, which is 100 libraries throughout the Cleveland area and the surrounding area, and I can request a book online because I have all the individual borrowers. We have our accounts. We can access them online. I can request a book, and if any of those 100 libraries have it, they send it to my Medina library, who then calls me to tell me to come and get it. So I've been able to read a lot more comic books than I could afford to buy because of that.
Is there one you can recommend? Is there a particular favorite?
Marvel-wise, it's Ms. Marvel.
Excellent, yeah.
Manga-wise, I have two favorites right now. Assassination Classroom, which is about an alien creature who destroyed the moon and is promising to destroy the Earth in a year, but during that year he wants to teach middle school. And the other one is Princess Jellyfish, about a group of nerds basically that live in a house together, and they're about to lose this house because a bigger company wants to buy it and gentrify the area, and so they turn to fashion design to encouraged by one of the lead characters who's a cross-dresser. They get into the fashion industry to try to save their home. Very human stuff, funny. There's a weird book out from Image that's just wrapping up called Postal. Usagi Yojimbo by Stan Sakai, who I think is our greatest living cartoonist. There's just so much good stuff out there.
And now I have a final question. Are there any barriers we have to still overcome with superhero comics or with any comics that you'd like to see happen soon?
We need to look beyond the traditional ways of doing them. I have great editors on Black Lightning. Our differences of opinion, which I usually win, are all because I'm doing things that that's not the traditional way of doing it. I'll throw out a line and they'll go, well, shouldn't we explain this more? And I go, no, we don't have to. The point's made. If I explain it more, I lock myself into stuff, and then I'm locked into it forever. I tell the reader as much as they need to know. I throw out a few cookies so they'll have stuff to, talk about online. What does this mean? But I'm very much trying to do comics in a somewhat different way. I'm not trying to reinvent them overnight, but I'm doing things differently with them. And there's stuff coming up that I can't really, I don't want to tell you about because I don't want to ruin it. But I have broken tradition a number of times already in these 6 issues that I've written. And that's what I want to continue doing. I don't want there to be hard and fast rules. There's no one way to write a superhero comic. Right. There's room to try it different ways.
Right. I read the original trade of the Black Lightning collection, and I couldn't figure out, when you created him, where his powers came from. Was that consistent, or what happened?
No, it wasn't. Okay. Remember, I created his powers in about an hour.
Okay.
So he had the powers originally came artificially. He had a power belt because one of the DC vice presidents wanted us to create all sorts of stuff that we could sell to little black children. That was his quote. I want to sell toys to little black children, Tony. And he wanted me to give Black Lightning a Black Lightning mobile and a Black Lightning plane.
Oh, the Batman Black Lightning.
And I'm doing stories set in Suicide Slum of Metropolis.
Right.
So we had an argument about this, and I'm screaming at Sal. So, oops, I gave his name, Sal Harrison. And I'm saying, okay, Sal, this is what I'm going to do. Black Lightning drives up to the dope house. And, and he beats up all the dope pushers. And when he comes out, his car's up on blocks because it's been stripped. So he gets pissed, and he comes back the next night in his Black Lightning plane, and he strafes the neighborhood. And Sal goes, you're not taking this seriously. I said, no, Sal, I'm not. But I said, look, here's a belt. Make this belt. Sell this power belt to little black children. which we never did it.
No.
but eventually I just said, no, he should have the powers internally. And in the current version, and this actually evolved in the previous versions, he's a metahuman.
Yeah.
So in my theory, in the original series, the belt activated his metahuman powers. I haven't explained when he first got his metahuman powers in the new series, because one of the things I did, even though I was reinventing the character, was decide not to do an origin story.
Right.
So the new series opens up, he's been Black Lightning for a few years. Eventually I'll tell you how he became Black Lightning, but I didn't think it was important for my first story. But he is a metahuman and the powers are natural.
Something that always confused me as a kid, when they did, was it Justice League?
No, the Super Friends cartoon.
Super Friends cartoon, and they had Black Vulcan. I'm like, who the hell is Black Vulcan? I've been reading Black Lightning. Where did Black Vulcan come from? So what was up with that?
Okay, I was supposed to get a cut of any Black Lightning money. DC didn't want to give me a piece of their Hanna-Barbera money.
Wow.
So they told Hanna-Barbera that, well, if you want to use Black Lightning, you have to pay extra. And they said, well, we'll just steal the character. So that's where Black Vulcan comes from. And in fact, the last issue, that was like the final straw, because DC hadn't been living up to their agreements. So the last issue of the first series of Black Lightning I wrote had a con woman named Barbara Hanna who had a fake Black Lightning.
Nice.
And much to my amazement,
They published it?
they published it.
All right, so there you go, guys. I'd like to thank Lee Gaddis of Gaddis Gaming and Tony Isabella, Marvel and DC Comics legendary writer and creator of Black Lightning. Thank you so much for coming to Canada for the first time in 30 years. And hopefully we'll have you again soon.
Good luck
Thanks
on
a
getting
lot.
back across the border.
There you
I'm
go.
really nervous about this. Those guys have machine guns. And it's like Canada, you know, our BFF. and they got machine guns. I'm really scared about my country. They're just effing crazy.